The Stooges, the greatest rock and roll band of all time.
Maybe, dude. Arguably, for what they did and the amount of time that they did, could be considered
misunderstood at the beginning.
Yeah,
completely overlooked, but highly regarded as the greatest rock and roll band of all time by so many people. So much influence, so much.
The influence is undeniable. For sure.
For four guys to create something so raw and
primal.
Yes, there's the words that you can describe it have nothing to do except for power. They were really just a powerful rock and roll band, fuzzy, nasty, in your face, all about that. At the same time that there was bands like The Doors, they were kind of like that, but
not to that degree.
Not to that degree, because Iggy was just like in your face.
Yeah, for sure.
Iggy Pop, James Williamson at the very end, the Asheton brothers, Ron and Scott, and then Dave Alexander on bass. The original lineup of the Stooges, incredible. Every aspect of every one of their songs. There's so many different. I don't know. The way that they framed the whole record for the first one, the second one completely is one of those that you go back and forth with. And you're like, which one's better? I don't know. Which one's better?
They're a little different, but they're, like I said, I've been listening to them both back to back in the car lately, and I love those two.
Oh, man. And then you listen to Raw Power, and it's like, oh, my God, it is Raw Power.
It is Raw Power.
Yeah, that's all it really is 100% unadulterated, fucking in your face. You know, it's just one of those things that you really put so much feeling into.
Welcome to After Dark.
Now that you've heard our first After Dark podcast, we're bringing you another one because it is the 50th anniversary of the very first record release from the Stooges, the self-titled record, The Stooges. My God.
8 great tracks. Brings me back. I had that poster on my wall.
Surprised you found a poster at that time.
Well, I think it was like, a newer poster.
Yeah, I made my own Stooges posters, man. For real. I'm wearing my shirt right now. That was the only shirt that I wanted to get is because it was so basic and it just said The Stooges on it.
Yeah, and I like it.
And I've had it for going on 20 years now, I think, or longer, 15, or maybe 15 to 20, 25. I don't know.
Numbers and stuff.
Yeah, but
as
Jesus
we've learned
Christ.
in previous episodes, we are mathematicians.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we missed it by a little bit. It was August 5th.
August 5th was the release.
1969.
Now think about what was going on in 1969 whenever this was released, because they started making music in the late 60s, 67, 68, 69. They were a group. They were together. Iggy Pop.
Well, you have a lot of social upheaval too. Just across, they're from Michigan here, and then you got, they played in '68. They played the Democratic National Convention with MC5.
Yes,
and MC5. We won't go down that road, but they're Motor City 5, pretty rad. I used to listen to that Kick Out the Jams album a lot, and so around that time, that you got all sorts of things going on, man. Not only politically and socially, but musically and with the arts and the the Beatles are done. They're about to be done. And,
Ann Arbor was a hotbed for the type of feeling in the music. There's a lot of people that would stop there for one, and there was a lot of influences that were going on at that same time.
Right.
MC5, has got to be one of the biggest influences on them, of course.
Sure.
And
as a peer kind of thing, though, too. They wanted to, they looked up to him, but they also played with them. You know what I mean?
Because they kind of looked at him and was like, man, you guys got some good songs. They were like the little brother band.
Right.
But then became something that was more, they were the Godfathers of punk rock, you could say.
Didn't MC5 actually get found before them, or
well, technically yes.
They were bigger than them.
Yeah. Elektra Records, they sent a representative to go sign them,
right?
And at the same time, Wayne Kramer, I think, or one of them from the MC5 was like, "Hey, you need to go check out our little brother band. There are these guys called the Stooges, And whenever that guy describes how he heard them, he didn't see them first; he heard them first.
Yeah,
and was like, "This is it." These guys are fucking badass. So he calls back and he says something like, hey, we're going to sign the MC5, and then we got this other band they could be really good too. It's very undeveloped, but they could be really big.
Let's give them a shot,
let's give the MC5 $20,000, and then see if the little band will take 5. And they signed them both on the same day in the same room, everything like that. So
they go to New York, right?
Well, let's kind of start at the beginnings of everything with Iggy, a little bit, just to kind of frame where this all kind of came from. Because Iggy had been in a band called the Iguanas, had played drums since he was a little kid. Decided after the Iguanas that he was going to go to Chicago.
What's his real name though?
James Newell Osterberg.
Yeah.
So he basically went to Chicago. When he was in Chicago, he played for all kinds of different people, all kinds of different blues men. He was like, I'm going to go to the source and I'm going to learn what the blues is, you know, kind of in the rawest form. I'm going to get there in the clubs. So he didn't really get to play with a lot of people. But the people that he did play with, there was a lot of, you know, I guess the Shondells, weird bands like that. Oh, yeah. But most of them were like, you're a little white kid. You know, I don't know if this is for you. And I think he describes that he was sitting there smoking a joint and he was like, nah, I'm going to go back home. And I'm going to start my own raw kind of form of music here. I'm going to do something different.
Yeah.
So whenever he went back, basically got a ride back with one of the Asheton brothers. You know, they had a friend that had a car, came and picked him up, and then brought him back. And he was like, hey, why don't we do this? You know, Scott, the drummer, Iggy was a big-time drummer. I always tried to get Iggy to teach him things like, how do you do this and what do you do with this?
So he came back home too, right?
They all kind of came at the same time,
yeah.
And then you got Ron, which was a bass player in a couple of bands, but then he took over guitar in this band, and they had a hard time kind of getting started, just like everybody in a regular kind of a band. They had like a really good punk kind of...
They're playing like Louie and stuff like that. You know, like they're just playing
on oil drums, weird shit, right?
Oh yeah, and then they were doing the weird shit.
Yeah, and that's kind of how they really started playing around Ann Arbor and things like that. And then they met the MC5, and that's kind of where they go. And Iggy's really whole idea was, let's just try to create something weird. And they were doing weird shit with vacuum cleaners and fucking wearing dresses on stage.
Tubes and he was dressing weird. He was just trying to be weird.
He was just trying to be out there. He would go out in whiteface, which is kind of weird, you know? So after they got signed, and at this point, they still didn't really have a lot of really big songs. But as soon as they got signed, that's when Ron wrote, of course,
the riff for I Want
to Be Your Dog.
And that's what I want to point out. I should note here real quick, a lot of this information I'm getting from the Jim Jarmusch film, Gimme Danger.
Yes.
Which is great. It's on Amazon Prime. Anyone can stream that right now if you have that. And my own experiences with the Stooges here.
I also have Iggy's first book, I Need More.
I Need More, okay.
I have that book, which is just a really small paperback that kind of...
So those are our references, I guess.
Yeah, he has a little bit of influences. And plus some of my influences, too, was in the early days of eBay. Whenever I was on there, people were... Because they had a lot of overseas documentaries about the Stooges, but you couldn't find them on DVD or VHS.
Like with footage.
So they were
Like
bootlegs
bootleg
of these things, like with Ron Asheton and all the other Stooges, you know. And I remember getting, you know, the Stooges Volume 1, you know, and it was like this French documentary with him sitting there like, maybe I should write songs like this, you know, like 25 words or less. And, you know, if you got something to say, if you can say it in 25 words, you got a song.
Yeah,
right
and
there.
I really like that motto. Yeah.
And that is a really awesome mindset to have because you're like, why would I? There's some artists that can do, like a Bob Dylan, can do like 52 choruses and you're enthralled the whole time. You know what I mean?
Right. That speaks to me, though, that mantra, I guess.
And that was something that he took back from Chicago, too.
Yeah.
It's like it was really kind of get into that purest form of it.
One thing I noticed when you were talking about I Want to Be Your Dog, when he first wrote the riff, he was like, Iggy mentioned, you know, you could tell the MC5 were looking at him like, well, you got a pretty good riff there, you know, because you remember this is the band that got the more money than them,
right?
The not quote unquote bigger band, if you will, at the time. I don't know how else to say it, but
because they were the White Panther Party at that point. They were they became dopes and guns and fucking in the street.
Not right.
They were there, you know. I mean, was it John Sinclair was kind of their leader? It was like, hey man, we're gonna fucking take this out, and the MC5 was like, yes, and the Stooges were like, we just want to have fun, you know what I mean?
Right.
We just want to go out and have fun. And Iggy was a weird dude at that point too.
That's why they got the nihilist thing, is what he said, which is kind of cool because it just reminded me of the Big Lebowski, the nihilist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Iggy was such a weird dude at that time too. Like he owned an apartment, and I read that he used to take little shits in corners and weird stuff like that. Just weird stuff. Even before he met like anybody like John Cale or anybody from the Velvet Underground and stuff like that.
Oh, you're right.
Because he was just a weird dude. You know, he was just like, like, fuck it. He would build little forts out of his furniture, you know. And,
Wouldn't he kind of go squat places?
Yeah. Literally, I mean, he was all over the place. He was that gutter punk before gutter punk was like even
before,
a thing. Yeah.
Or literally and figuratively squatting in homes.
Squatting and shitting all over the place and like playing with it. Weird stuff, right? Well, we all know how weird Iggy Pop is, but we know his influence is fucking massive. Without his idea for this, we wouldn't have most of modern music, I don't think. Now, whenever you have, with the rock style,
so much.
Yeah, there's so many influences, and his biggest influence, and I think a lot of influences for the people of that day, were seeing the Doors live. So the first time you see the Doors, and they saw the Doors play in Ann Arbor, I believe, or maybe it was Detroit. I can't really remember. I don't have 100%, but they saw them, and that changed everybody. Seeing Jim Morrison and the Doors live would have changed so many things, and you got to think that Jim Morrison and the Doors probably were such a huge influence on a lot of people that didn't get a lot of play beyond like what the Stooges did. Right. Now the Stooges they caught a lucky break. They caught a hell of a lucky break with the Elektra Records, signing them.
Well, they got a lot of creative freedom, but they had their hits, I guess, and their influences again undeniable. But I mean, did they have and when you say got lucky, what do you mean?
Got lucky with the record signing.
Yeah.
So their friends were like, "Hey, check these guys out."
Yeah,
and nowadays, I don't think that really happens as often as it should. But the guy that signed them literally saw something in them that was like, let's put all of our eggs in these baskets right here, and let's see which ones hatch into something really good. You know what I mean?
So they go to New York, right?
So they end up in New York to record the first record, and
with Mr. John Cale.
Yes, from the Velvet Underground,
a classically trained musician.
And they love the Velvet Underground, and they thought, oh my God, this is a great idea to have him produce our record.
Right.
They went to some little studio that was kind of like a blues and soul kind of a studio, and they go in there, and it's a really small room. And they had so much trouble with the people who are like, no, we don't do it this way. And they're like, no, we're loud. We are abusive. This is what we want. But they didn't even really have a full album at that time, too.
Yeah, they only had, 4 songs?
Like 4 songs, yeah. 4 songs. And I mean, the first song off the first record, 1969, is such a testament to the time for an outsider's voice speaking for it, not a hippie voice almost, because the hippies were kind of the norm, I would say.
It's its own. It's a new thing, really. Yeah. It's its own thing.
The lyrics, the music, the rawness, the physicality of the track really kind of draws you into it, and then you get to "I Want to Be Your Dog" is number 2, and that main riff is one of those things. Now, the first time that I had ever heard the Stooges wasn't any of their records. It was off of. It was a cover song that Sonic Youth did.
Really?
Of "I Want to Be Your Dog." And one of my buddies was like, hey, you can learn this song. It's really easy. Let me show you. So he showed me how to play it on bass. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anything by the Stooges or anything like that. And I was playing the Stooges before I even had listened to the Stooges. Right. So it was really cool to be like, oh, man, this is like one of the first songs I learned was the Stooges song.
Awesome. That's kind of weird because the first time I remember getting into the Stooges was this song played in a skateboard video that I used to watch a lot, and I was like, who's that? And the Stooges, and I'm like, oh, and then I bought the album, and then it's like, oh, it's track 2 on this should be noted, this is an 8-track album. This album consists of 8 tracks, and they only had 4 of them. But it is cool that we both, our first introduction to them was "I Want to Be Your Dog."
Yeah, yeah. Cool. I mean, that's kind of where a lot of people come from. And
that was their kind of big, first kind of big, hit, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word.
Right.
Big, the one off the album.
That's the one of the most memorable Stooges songs. Yeah. I guess that you can really point at just because it is so influential and so basic.
I know so many people have covered it.
The main riff is such a simplistic, but yet just thick. You know what I mean? It kills the whole time. And at this same point, they kind of get their name, the Stooges, too, because they got signed, and they actually call Mo Howard at one point from the actual Three Stooges. Ron Asheton calls him up and says, hey, we're a band from Michigan. Can we use the name the Stooges? And Mo Howard says something like, I don't care what you fucking call it, just don't call it the Three Stooges.
And then hangs
up.
Yeah.
So it's like they got the blessing from an actual Stooge.